What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares against. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus.
I had a thought. I'd like to share it because I think it has value. Sometimes you can have a thought and it can be really a challenge to explain it to others. If you're a male, just try explaining it to your wife if you're married. You'll find out how challenging it can be because we all look at things from different perspectives and come from different, not just backgrounds, but male and female. We just think differently a lot, and sometimes things that can really make sense to me might not have the same clarity to someone else. So, wow. Thought that was the Shekinah for a moment, but I see it's just natural lighting. So, I want to share this out. I want to see if I can get this across in a way that makes sense to me. If it doesn't, now anytime I share a thought, I want everyone to know that if you have a question or something doesn't sound quite right, or you're not really sure, then just raise your hand and ask, because I want to clarify. But I want to talk about something in the book of Revelation. And this is something that, I don't know, I hope it came to me by inspiration. I was reading and I was thinking about different things and I was going over some different thoughts in my mind. And I will first preface it with this, of what this concept kind of deals with. It's one of the greatest challenges in the church or in Christian circles through that there's been like these two camps of the works camp and the non-works camp, and it's like, you can pretty much build a case for which camp you're in. In fact, sometimes you don't have to leave the thought of the writer in the thought he's making to sometimes two people. I remember I came from my previous background. I kind of viewed this works thing as like, well, it's not really of works until you know God, and then it's all about works. And so, Ephesians 2 would be quoted, that this is the gift of God. It's not of works lest any should boast. So it's like, okay, that's the non-works camp. I mean, come on, what could be more clearer than that? And then Paul adds to that and says, but we are his workmanship created unto good works. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Is it about works or is it not about works? I mean, obviously this was not confusing to Paul when he wrote that. It made perfect sense to him when he wrote that. But if you really think about it, for me, I had to do a lot of kind of working with that. Instead of emphasizing I won't say we, I'll say I, because I'm the one speaking here, but instead of emphasizing the not of works, because I was a little more in the works camp, that I emphasized, well, no, wait a minute. It's been preordained that we're going to do good works. So, I mean, once we are accepted in, then we need to start doing good works. We need to focus in. We need to get these things, under control and take care of this stuff. And so that's been like a really big a challenge to how to balance that. What really is the balance there? So I was reading in the book of Revelation. We were on a trip. I was on an airplane, and so I got out my Bible software on my laptop, and I started thinking about these things. And in Revelation 2, I think it's around the 20th verse or something like that. I don't know if you've got it, that you can throw it up there, but he says to Thyatira, he says, I know your works and your patience. I'm not going to get this perfectly right, but close. But I think he deals with, I know your works and your patience and your tribulation and your works. And the last to be more than the first. Now, this has been a really challenge to translators, because it just sounds kind of odd in the way that he says it. Some have translated that from the concept of that you're doing more works now than you were doing at first, or something along that line. So it's could you find it in there? Or I think it's around the 20th, the 219. Sorry, you got to help me, because I'm not really good like nailing down the numbers. So my mind just doesn't think that way. So I started looking at this and thinking about this verse, and I thought, what was the writer's thought when he would write this? Did he want this to be as ambiguous to us as the way that it comes across? Like, what does he mean? He just doesn't really make it really clear, it doesn't seem. So I started looking at this, and I had an interlinear. Now, I'm not a Greek scholar, but if I have a thought, I like to find a Greek scholar and ask him questions. And generally a Greek scholar, if you ask him a question and you go, hey, I haven't really had a Greek class or anything like that, but I want to ask this question. Their first response is, you haven't had a Greek class? Stay out of the Greek. You'll get all messed up. And I'm like, well, okay, I know that. I get that. That's why I'm asking you the question. You're the scholar. Tell me. So what I found that was really, really interesting about this thing is, because when we write, our thoughts flow in one direction, right? But in other languages, they don't actually put things in the same order that we would. If you've ever heard somebody that's speaking English that's Spanish, you notice how they'll kind of have weird ways of saying things at times? It's because the grammar is just backwards in English as it is to others, like Hebrew and even with Greek. So if I was, so I'll give you a little Greek thought in Greek languages. Generally, when you're dealing with something that's a possession, that's kind of the object, and the possessor really isn't so much the object. It's the object, the thing that's being possessed. So if I wanted to say your lights are on in your car, or on your car. If I was speaking Greek, it would come out, the lights are on in the car yours, because the car is the object, and then who possesses that car would come after. That's the way, if you notice, that's the way they speak a lot. If you're a Greek scholar in any way, then don't jump in there. Now what can happen is, because I asked this guy this, I said, well, what if those things get flipped around? What if it's flipped around the other way, where it seems like the possessor is first and the object is second? And his response was, well, if it's obvious, then it's okay. It's not the norm, but it would be okay. It wouldn't be considered improper. Well, in your interlinear, if you're looking at something that's interlinear, what it does is it gives you whatever the main translation is into, it'll give you that in a line, okay? The way we would say it. Underneath, it'll put the corresponding word of where it is. But it's not necessarily written that way. So what it'll do is it'll put a little number next to the word, like it might say 2, 3, 1, 5, 6, 8, 7. It'll put it in what the order is. So that probably seems like I don't mean to get so deep, okay? But if you think about that, as I was reading and looking at this verse, I thought, well, maybe there'd be a different word. Maybe it's a different word. Works and works, it wasn't. And yours, it wasn't a different word. But what was really interesting is the words were reversed in the first of what would have been seemingly the normal. Now, when I asked this Greek scholar that I did not know, I actually found him online in some debate, and he seemed like a really, a rebel, you know. In fact, the reason I found him is he said that whoever wrote the book of Revelation could not pass Greek 101. Okay, so I thought, this is my guy. So I emailed him and explained. Of course, like the story is, he told me, don't get into that. And so I said, well, I just have this question. Would you help me? And I brought this out to him about these things being backwards. And actually, if you look, when he deals with the 7 churches, he does them at times both directions. And you'll begin to see a pattern if you look at the way that he does this. So, have you had Greek? Okay, because you're smiling over there. So, help me out if you got a thought. Bail me out here. So, what was interesting is, I know thy works was reversed. In other words, it was, I know you, the works. And then he continues on and he says, and I know the works yours. And then, so this was the interesting in the phrase. What I noticed in all of the churches, he gave this thought about, at different churches, he goes, I have somewhat against you. Okay? Every place that he had somewhat against the church, it was, I know the works yours. So what became interesting is, what is really possessing what? If the works are possessed by me, if they're motivated by me, then they're my works. They can be great. In fact, with Ephesus, he doesn't really criticize them for everything that he lists that they're doing is like really good stuff. But he still has somewhat against them. There's something that has changed with them. And with Ephesus, he starts out, I know the works yours. Doesn't mean that they weren't doing things inspired by God, but he was focusing in on the things that they were doing out of their own inspiration. And when he says, I will judge every man according to his works, or give in later on with Thyatira, when he says, I will judge every man according to his works, it's or give to every man according to his works, it's I will give to every man according to the works yours. But when he speaks into, I think it's, I want to say Sardis, he says, I have not found your works perfect before God. But he doesn't criticize them for that. He doesn't have anything against them, even though their works are not really perfect before God, because it's, I know you, the works, not perfect before God. So there was something even in the works possessing them, and they were following that even though it wasn't really quite perfect, as far as maybe they weren't totally getting it completely, there was no judgment against them. In fact, you find no judgment against the last 3 churches, and it's always in the last 3, the works, or you, the works. Now, there's another interesting statement. So I want to come back to Paul's statement. But there's another interesting statement later on in Revelations 2 when it talks about the perseverance of the saints. Like, what do you have to persevere through? And in one period, he's talking about a unique period of time, which, and there again, there's some challenges in how this is translated, but newer translations, I think, use this concept of he that is to be killed with the sword will be killed with the sword, and he that is to go into captivity will go into captivity. So we just look historically at the church and the things that happened, and if you were born in the time of the Reformation, or you were born earlier than the Reformation, and you were in spiritual captivity, you had to persevere. It's what God required of you. You didn't really have this, there were levels you could find in deeper experience, but it wasn't just going to change. And if you were in the Reformation, when over 1 million Christians died, sad to say, it was a brutal period of time, but it had its purpose. And if you were in that time, you had it was your lot. God would repay. God's going to make and reconcile everything right. But I get to this other perseverance of the saints. The second one it talks about this being the perseverance of the saints. Blessed are they that Blessed are the dead. This is another one. I can't help it. I just love these the ones that they struggle with, because it means there's something deeper and good in that. But he says, blessed are they that die in the Lord from henceforth, for they shall have rest from their, how does it say that? They shall have rest from their works. No, it doesn't say. They shall have rest from their labor, and their works will follow them. Well, what does it mean? What did it mean to the early church for the dead to die in the Lord? I mean, a lot of commentators have thought, well, maybe he's speaking about people that have come to the Lord and they've died. And this has kind of been a general, and hey, maybe it's right, but this has been a general consensus. It's like, okay, well, when you die, then you don't have to labor anymore. And so when you go on to heaven, then your works just follow you. You like get accounted for after you get there. But for the dead to die in the Lord, we know that the church understood that those that were dead in trespasses and in sins that didn't know God, there was a death. And we know that Paul viewed another death, that the dead were dying, was when they were buried with baptism with Christ and raised to newness of life. So you kind of got a concept there. And then this rest from their labor is like, it's not like just like, well, I'm working every day. It's like toil. It's like fervently trying to accomplish, which is where Christianity many times has found itself. But it seems like it's talking about a day when those that die in the Lord, that God has ordained, that they won't any longer have to labor to try to do the right thing. But the Spirit of God will fill them and motivate them in such a way that everything they do will be the works of God. It won't really be of them, that it'll be God working through them. So when you think about these concepts, now you go back and look at Paul, and what he's saying is that it's not of works. It's not of an intellectual accomplishing God's will. God doesn't really call us to use our great wisdom and mind to figure out how to further and better and make his kingdom better. His kingdom's good enough. It's perfect the way that it is. But what he does is he has ordained us that when we enter into that, we begin to rest from our own works and begin to let his inspiration fill us. And when God is providing those things, there is no judgment against that. That is what Paul was trying to talk about, I think, when he's talking about there's no condemnation for those that are walking in the Spirit. In other words, when the Spirit of God is directing our steps, then there's no condemnation for that. If we don't get something totally right, then that's one thing. But it's when we begin to try to formulate how and what we can do to please God that we become judged according to our works. So if you think about that, well, how does that relate? How does that relate to you or to the average Christian? How did it relate even to those in that day? And I think of John when he concludes in the book of John, he talks about this experience of Peter, God telling Peter, follow me. He keeps telling him, follow me, feed my sheep, follow me. And so Peter kind of gets it, and he goes, well, what's John going to be doing? And he's like, if I tell John to tarry, to do nothing until I return, what is it to you? Follow me. So there was something that John was trying to portray right then in this earliest birth of the church, or what was going to happen, that he was setting the stage. And then he continues on, which is very funny. Like, if you're writing a book, the whole point of the book is the conclusion, right? Nobody writes a book and then hits the punch and then writes a couple extra chapters just because the book isn't long enough. You want to deliver the final thought, the punchline, and that's how you conclude. So John's book seems kind of odd in that way, because he concludes it with, and all of his brethren, which would have been the other apostles, They said John's going to live till Jesus returns. And John says, but Jesus didn't say that. He only said, if I tell him to tarry until I return, then what is it to you? That's all he said. So all of the apostles, it seems like around him, they thought they knew what Jesus was saying to John. He's telling Peter, you can't know. But the rest of them, when he said this, they're like, well, John, obviously, Jesus is telling you that you're going to be here till he returns. Great news. John's like, no, you don't get it. That isn't what he said. See, because there's sometimes when God will inspire us in ways that we're going to want people to really understand. We're going to want to go to people and say, do you see my calling? Do you see what God wants me to do? And they're going to go, oh, that's not really what I'm getting out of that. But that's where real faith comes in, is when God asks us to step out in something that isn't always apparent to those around us. Ultimately, God will vindicate his works. He'll show where he's called. So thinking of John along that line, well, you can say, well, I didn't get up today with like this thought hitting me, telling me what to do. But Jesus said that the Spirit of God, when it was come, this comforter, it would teach us and it would convict us. That this Spirit in us, if we'll give access to it, it will begin to help us to learn how to follow. Somebody can come up with great ideas with you. They can say, well, hey, do this week, do this, or if you'll just change this in your life or institute this in your life. If it's not really of God that's really inspiring you to do that, chances are it'll be a fleeting thing. You might do it, you might feel really good about it for, a month or so long, but if it's not really of God, it's somebody else's works. That's why God calls every one of us in our simplicity. It doesn't mean that the way, like look at Peter, he kept telling him, feed my sheep, follow me. And then as soon as Peter wants to know what John's going to do, he's like, what if I tell him to do nothing? What he's kind of saying is, what if it looks like he's doing nothing? Is that really your responsibility? So it's not that it's in a way, it's a shift of thinking. It's a shift of mind. It's this thing of asking God, inspire me. Let your works through with me. I mean, Jesus was very prominent in this thought. He said that he himself was only did what he saw the Father. Where he saw the Father working, God showed him where he was working. I mean, he didn't show him everywhere he was working. It had been impossible for him to be involved in everything. But wherever he showed him he was working, he worked with him. And he says, it's the Father that does the works in me. It's not me. In fact, when it talks about Christ in you, the hope of glory. It's not, we have had a tendency, and I don't want to make it too long, I don't want to get it too complicated, but if you can get this thought, maybe it will help a little bit, but Christ in you isn't Jesus in you. Jesus Christ was not his first and last name. It's kind of like Jesus Christ is just like the big name for Jesus. It's just the cooler name. Christ means something very different from Jesus. Jesus dealt with the guy that was there, the individual, who he was. Christ was the anointing. There was a Christos, which came from the Hebrew word Mashiach or Messiah, which meant the anointed one. And if you notice, if you read through the Gospels, you'll see that these terms are used differently. It isn't always Jesus the Christ. Sometimes it's the Christ. Most of the time it's just Jesus. And then sometimes it's Jesus the Christ. It was the Christ in Jesus. That was his hope too. That was how he was going to follow the inspiration of the Father, was through the anointed. It says, how it talks about how that God anointed Jesus with the Holy Ghost. It was God dwelling in him by means of the Spirit of God, however you define that. And it's that in us. It's the Christ in us. It's that anointing that is our hope of glory. Now you can't, so if it's the Christ in us, then it means it's not going to really necessarily be the big booming voice. It's not going to be the, hey, get up and go down to 3rd Street and see a man with, I mean, God could do that in certain situations, and he has, but I don't think that's his ultimate goal. I think he wants his creation to persevere until that point comes that everything they do is inspired of God. They just become a living vessel. All you can really do is wake up every day and be open to it and ask God, show me where you're working, and I'll work with you in whatever that is, in the simplicity of that. If you live in that simplicity, it may not look to others like you're doing the will of God, but if it's sincere, God will not miss an opportunity to use a vessel that is open to him. You will have inspiration. You will affect people. You will receive yourself in that thing. So as we come together and we're supporting one another, and then in this type of a setting and interaction, it becomes really important that we allow Christ in us to have its way. It doesn't mean that, okay, hey, it's open mic Sunday. Well, I guess nobody's going to get up. It needs to be me. You know, somebody's got to fill this. No, it's like, God, any service. It's like, God, is there anything you're wanting me to say? Am I feeling something kind of in here, some inspiration? When you open up to that, and we've seen that happen, we begin to watch God weave like a tapestry of thought from different situations. And sometimes in the beginning, it can be like, man, this is a little disconjointed or something like that. Where's the thought in here? And then something happens at the end and can tie it together. And then you walk away going, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And you realize that the wisdom of God, when it's allowed to function, when it's allowed to have its perfect will show things to us and to others that defy human intellect and ability to formulate and orchestrate. So I hope that wasn't, so the works, it's the works, if God's works possess us, then ultimately we will fulfill the will of God.
This is going to be the far opposite of Todd speaking, but I don't know why my heart was pounding, and this is something really dumb that I'm going to talk about. But he was talking about works. I don't even know why I'm saying this, just because my heart just was pounding. Today we visited a church of some friends that we know, and Julie went up and sang. And after church, a man came up to me that I knew, and he said, "Why did you stand so far away from them? You should have been closer to the piano." And I said, "I didn't sing." I said, "That was my daughter, Julie." And he said, "She looks just like you." And he's all, "I could have sworn that was you up there." And I don't see it. Well, every time on Facebook, when somebody posts like if Julie posts a picture, I post a picture. If I post one of me or vice versa, like if I post one of me, it'll say, "Do you want to tag Julie Harrison?" And I just think she looks more Harrison than me, but it happens all the time. Other people will post pictures of me or her and vice versa. It'll say, "Do you want to tag Colleen Harrison? Do you want to tag Julie Harrison?" And I just had this thought while I was sitting here and you were talking about that. This is so dumb. But if all of us in our life, at some point, something will come up and say, "Do you want to tag Jesus?" And for my life for us to be for me to try to be not try or whatever to be more like Jesus, that when people saw me, that I had him inside, and that I could reflect that to others, and we would come up the same, for me to be like my Savior, and I just got that thought sitting there. Anyway, so that's all I.
Thank you very much, and thank you for welcoming us, all of you. It's just a privilege to be with God's people wherever they are, and we know Joel and Vivian, and we've had the opportunity to meet some of the rest of you. My wife Carol's here with me. I'm thankful for that. Yeah, you ought to see her. She signs some songs sometimes with the music, and it's really beautiful. But anyhow, just to celebrate what the Lord is doing here is a wonderful thing, and we came in last Saturday. I have a cousin up in Knoxville, and he's down in Mexico, Tijuana today. We can pray for him. He's ministering the word down there. And when my young friend there got up and shared that, I have one thought. There he is. Yeah, there's a fellow I've heard from at Flood Church in San Diego that shared a little story I'll share with you. And he was invited to speak at a church down in Africa, and he's from a large congregation. And he went down there and had an interpreter with him, obviously. Sorry. Thank you. He had an interpreter with him, and so as he was, getting ready to speak, the music was going on and on and on, and it wasn't really his style of music, if you know what I mean. And so he was kind of saying, well, it's past time. I was supposed to be up there, and it's going on and on and on and on. And finally he turned to the interpreter and he said, what's going on? When am I going to get a chance to speak? And the interpreter said, well, let me explain it to you. He said, this is a really, really poor community. And they farm for their food. And it hasn't rained for a long time. And it rained yesterday. And these people are thanking God for the rain. So, if you're not into the music style or whatever, it's just an opportunity to be grateful. And I just want to express that I'm grateful for every one of you here that love Jesus. And my desire in my life, my purpose is to encourage people in Jesus Christ.
Hello. I have something quick, a little story I'd like to share that I think sort of ties in with Todd and something that's been on my mind. I work at Ramsey Solutions, and on Wednesdays we do devotionals. And this guy came up and he told a story, and I think it just really hit me in a different way. And he started off by saying like he had this dream, and it was a nightmare, and he woke up from it, but the dream was that God was laughing at him, and not in a ridiculing way, but it just sort of, like he was laughing at him, and it just weirded him out. And so he said later in the week, he was doing something with his son. Son's probably Maddox's age, 5. That's my son. And they were moving this big piano or table or something, whatever. It was a big object, doesn't matter what it is. And so he's moving it, and he's inching it along and pushing it along, and his son comes over, and he comes underneath him, and he's pushing it. And his son looks up and he's like, "Dad, look out! You're in my way." So he's like, "Okay." Step back, and he kind of laughed, and it hit him. And he's like, "That's what I do. I go underneath the Father, and I'm trying to push this along instead of letting God do it." And it really just hit me in a way where it was like, how often do I not only, in a different way say, God, help me with this. I need help with this. But this is how you need to help me, God. This is how we need to push it. It needs to go over here. Instead of letting God direct where things go and letting Him move it through. Because ultimately, I don't have, if I give it to God, I don't have to do anything. I can just follow. And that's the Christ, I would say, in me. But, there's always something for me that pushes back. There's always something that I have some sort of better idea. And I don't know what that is, but, I try to get rid of it. But sometimes it's, you notice it more sometimes than others. And usually when something's not going right or something's not going my way, it's because I'm fighting it. I'm not riding the wave. God's not logical. I'm not sure how Will even follows him, because Will's really logical. So, God, Will's super logical. So if things don't make sense, he's like, no, that doesn't work. But God doesn't make sense. And he can do things that don't make sense. So, let him move the objects for you.
Is this logical? Do you have something to say? Oh, thank you. I'm Roger, if you don't know me. Some of you do. A lot of you do. I want to thank you for praying for me. Was it Ab? I've had kind of a whirlwind week of stuff that's happened and over the summer. Thank you for your prayers over the summer when my brother passed away. And on Monday, our dog's been getting sick, and we had to, had her. She went to doggy heaven on Tuesday, and that was rough. And I'm kind of like wondering what's going on, with death going, around me with certain things. And I know Monday, I like what you said about getting in the way of God and trying to push underneath him. I was picking my dog up Monday, and he bit me really hard, and my fingers, like his tooth almost went through my finger. And I'm like, wow, am I going to be able to play today? So I bandaged it up, but I didn't get mad at my dog because I knew he was sick, So, and he was in a lot of pain. So, and it's rough. I know I'm upset over a dog, but if you have dogs or cats, they get into your heart because they're there every day. It's like God. Their love is never ending. You can come home from work and have a real bad day, and there's your pet right there at the door. You can, yell at it for having an accident on the rug, but it doesn't matter because they're still going to come back up to you and love you anyway, just like God, when you get in his way. But I heard something today, and I just want to share this scripture because it kind of hit me. It's from 2 Corinthians chapter 1, 9 through 11. It certainly seemed to us as if we had gotten a death penalty. This was so that we would have confidence in God, who raises the dead instead of ourselves. God rescues us from a terrible death, and he will rescue us. We have set our hope on him that he will rescue us again. Since you are helping with your prayers for us, that many people can thank God on our behalf for the gift that was given to us through prayers of many people. So thank you for your prayers. And I have an unspoken prayer need also. Thank you.
I just had a simple little thought listening to all of this. And first of all, listening to Todd, I've listened to him many times, and some of the words I would follow, and some of them I wouldn't. A little too many wordies, and I'm going, oh no, Todd, oh no. But as I listened to him, I got so many thoughts out of what he said. And then when Colleen got up and simply said what she did, and then listening to Chad, I just had a little example. My little granddaughter, she was learning to talk, and she still jabbers quite a bit and runs her words all together and will think, what in the world is she saying? And her mom sent her to ballet class. And her one little brother said, Mom, she can't do ballet. She can't even talk English. How can you send her to ballet? She can't talk English. And sometimes just listening to Todd with where the you goes and where the works goes, and I thought maybe sometimes we may think, come on, God, just talk English to me because I don't know what you're saying. And Amelia would get to the point even when she would say the word, and she knew exactly what she was saying. She would try to do sign language with her fingers to explain to us what she was saying. And I often wonder sometimes how many times he has to try to do sign language with me to get through my point. And even listening to Todd tonight, it was times I thought he was doing sign language to get a point across to me. And I thank you very much, Todd, for what you said. And then Colleen, in just a few words, got a point to me and Chad in his. And I'm so glad that he never stops trying to communicate with me and with us, to communicate with his church and to get across to what he wants and where he wants the you to be. That is very important to me. That I think that's very important that I got out of Todd's talk tonight, is where the you goes, where it goes, and not where it fits in about the works. I just got a real thought out of that tonight. But I thought I just want to listen to him all my life and just to understand what he's trying to say to me and how simple sometimes it can be to listen to him, and we make jibber jabber out of it when it's really not that hard. And when Colleen said that tag Jesus, that's really the point, for us to show, for the world to see Jesus when they see us, and for him to constantly communicate with us on that level. But I just want to thank the Lord tonight for all I heard here tonight. Thank you.
I was listening to, I think, a podcast a few weeks ago, and they were talking about using your gifts and talents for the Lord. And you would think that you would go away from encouraged from that, but I just went away like, I could if he gave me some. That'd be nice, I don't have any gifts. I don't have any talents. I don't have anything. And I kept trying to find, they said, no, everybody has gifts and talents. Everyone does. And I kept asking the Lord to show me, what is my gift and what is my talent? I really don't know what they are. And so I had finally, it just really bothered me. I kept wanting to know what it was. I can't sing. I'm not musically inclined. I don't preach. I don't have any of those things. So I thought, well, one day we were doing something and people really thought I knew what I was doing. They're like, oh man, you just always have it together. I'm like, there's my gift. I have a gift that people think I know what I'm doing when I have no clue. And so, I thought, hey, that's a pretty good gift, I guess. I don't know. How do I use it for the Lord? Maybe I already am. I don't know. And it made me think of, growing up in church. I've always been in church since I was born. And, you had a pastor, you had assistant pastor, you had, whatever it was. But I really didn't even look to my pastor as a pastor, or however that line of authority or whatever, how it was supposed to be. It was different. Not that I never looked to my pastor as a pastor, but there were different men and women in the church, and it was I would watch how they lived their lives, how they raised their families. I would listen when they would get up in church and talk. And so I was thinking of that. I'm like, they probably never knew that was their gift for me. They probably never knew that was their talent for me, to help me in my life, that they were shepherding me when they didn't even know it. And so I thought, and we were singing that song today about whatever I have in my hands. I'm totally going to botch it. But whatever I have in my hands, multiply it, And I was thinking of that today. I thought, well, whatever I have, even if I have the gift of, pulling the wool over everybody's eyes, if that's what it is, I don't know. Whatever it is that I could, in my life, that he's working in me that I don't even know it, and I can't even see it, that he would use that to do something great in his kingdom. Because I had finally come to the conclusion that I was like, what's that Christmas song? The little boy who has nothing, so he gives him his heart, The little kid always sings it at Christmas, and that's every Christmas I'm thinking, well, that's all I have to give, but that's really all he wants. So that's all I have to give, and he can use it for whatever he wants, and that's all I have.
Okay. Just quickly, I got the thought between what everybody was saying is, Roger, when you or Jamie come home, do you expect your pets to be at the kitchen table playing Jenga or dancing, doing, the tango or something? No. The answer is no, but you do plan on going, and when when you get to the door, you're going to call out to them, and they're going to come to you with joy, and you're going to love them. And so, I just got the thought, we don't really particularly need talents. We just need to be who we are because the Lord comes to the door. He doesn't expect us to be putting together a monumental worldwide ministry necessarily. He's coming to our door going, I can't wait to see Chris and Tammy, I don't expect anything out of them. I just want to love them. And I'm going to love them, and they're going to love me, And so that was just something to add to what you were saying is just, we're not under any obligation to perform in any way. And that's a beautiful thought, because you can let the Lord begin to work through you and do what his will would be and his good will, and then just to have a love relationship with him. So I was just kind of came up, and it was just beautiful what you guys said.
I love the idea of the pets doing the tango. That's awesome. And you're like rating them. Oh, you missed a step, right? Oh, that's great. I've been thinking a lot about trusting the Lord this week, and I'll probably talk more about that next week. But to kind of go in the flow of what Debbie was talking about people contributing to you and shepherding you when they probably had no idea. And that really ties in with what Todd talked about you're just, being who you are in the Lord. You're praying, and then it isn't like he's going to boom to you every step or every word that you're going to make or take. So you just kind of go in this trusting way. And so years ago, we felt called to do ministry in Europe. And I'm sorry, there were times when it was hard, and it seemed like nothing good was coming of it. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to reach anyone, and I didn't know what songs to play, and I was trying, doing the best I could, and there were a lot of years when we felt like there wasn't much going on, and I remember one year I was actually doing I think it was the first time I did some actual concerts with the Dutch band. There was this guy in Holland that said, "Hey, I'll put together a band. You can do some concerts." But it was all about reaching people. There wasn't any different intent in my heart about that than anything else that I was doing, and it was just sometimes you just get to a place where you're like, Lord, are you in this? Are you you want me to do something else? I'd be happy to do something else. So I was just praying one night, Lord, if you're really in this, would you show me something? I don't like to, we just want to walk in faith, and I don't like to ask the Lord those kinds of things. Because to me it's like, needing a sign or something. We ought to have enough spiritual strength. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I prayed that night, Lord, would you show us something? And there was a service that we had in a place called Bonn, and it was one of the first times I really felt to preach. Like I really felt like not just to give my testimony, but the Lord really, to say it like the young people would say, the Lord really wrecked me right before the service. Like, I can't use you. You're too concerned with pleasing people. I did not send you here to entertain people. It was kind of, whoa, Lord, oh God, cut to the heart. I was cut to the heart. And so I said, okay, Lord, whatever you want to do. And I was just on fire, man. I was just preaching. And Julie and Sherry were at the back filming. And there's movies of it. And they're filming all the people leaving. They are. They're like, oh, there goes another one. Oh, man. Oh, there goes there goes that whole row. Because there was like, the guy advertised it like a concert, and I was, really wanting to have church, and so a lot of people left. It started, maybe with 150 people, and maybe there was 20 left at the end. And I gave them an opportunity to leave too. I said, I told them what I was feeling from God and what I was going to do, and then I said, I'm going to play this song. This is your opportunity to leave. And so they all stayed, and I thought, oh, great, hallelujah. So I just started going for it, and it was one of those times when you talk for 20 minutes before you even start talking about what you want to talk about. I talked for 20 minutes or something. I was just, and another thing, but what I really want to talk about is God's love, and they're like, oh my God. Well, anyway, so Bon lived on in our family like the Hindenburg or the Titanic, like a disaster. Like we would see road signs to Bon and like, oh, stay away, So 4 years later, I'm praying. I'm on this other tour, and we played in this city, and I had an interview before the concert, and this young man said, we were talking about music, and he said, yeah, I've been to some of your worship services. And I said, oh, really? Which one? He said, oh, I was at the one in Bonn. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, maybe I got a little carried away or something. And he said, well, it was unusual. I'd never been to anything like that. In fact, that it was me. I was the one that you brought to the altar call. I had forgotten. That's how fired up I was. Play a song. Come on up here. Wow. But he said with tears in his eyes, he said, I have to tell you, I've never felt the same in my heart since that night. I was like, Sherry, kids, did you? Nobody was around, of course. I didn't get any witnesses. But, the Lord will show you that he is in what you're doing. He is in if he's called you to something, you may not, it may be years later that somebody will say, hey, you shepherded me through that time. And you might not even have an idea. So just follow your inspiration. I was really inspired that night. And I felt like all that time I thought it was such a disaster. And somehow I felt like maybe I'd hurt people. Have you ever felt like that? You got really inspired about something, and then it seemed like, wow, somehow people's reactions weren't what you'd hoped. And so if that happens to you, stay with it. Stay with him. Stay in it. And continue on. And he will bring it to pass.